हेलो गाइस, वेलकम बैक टू लॉस्टॉर्मिंग प्लेटफॉर्म। आज के इस वीडियो में हम गारंटी के रिमेनिंग टॉपिक से डील करेंगे, दैट इज़ डिस्चार्ज ऑफ श्योरिटी एंड राइट्स ऑफ श्योरिटी। और अगर अभी तक आपने चैनल को सब्सक्राइब नहीं किया है देन प्लीज़ डू सब्सक्राइब। लेट्स स्टार्ट विद द वीडियो। एंड अगर आपने इसका पार्ट 1 नहीं देखा है देन डू वॉच दैट बिफोर वॉचिंग दिस वीडियो। उसका लिंक डिस्क्रिप्शन बॉक्स में मैंशनड एंड ऑल्सो आई लिंक इट ऑन टॉप, सो वॉच दैट। Okay, so a surety is said to be discharged when his liability as surety comes to an end. तो अब किस किस तरीके से surety की liability ख़त्म हो जाएगी? First being by revocation, second by conduct of the creditor and third on invalidation of the contract. So अगर इनमें से कुछ भी होता है then surety की liability comes to an end and he is discharged from his liability. So let's look at each one of them separately. Now let's look at discharge by revocation. Section 130 talks about revocation of continuing guarantee. A continuing guarantee may at any time be revoked by the surety as to the future transactions by notice to the creditor. So under section 130, guarantor can revoke a continuing guarantee by giving notice to the creditor with respect to the future transaction. Let's look at the example. A, in consideration of B's discounting at A's request bills of exchange for C, guarantees to B for 12 months the due payment of all such bill to the extent of 5,000 rupees. Now in this example, A is the guarantor, B is the creditor and C is the principal debtor. और A B को promise कर रहा है that he will pay for bill of exchange for 12 months for C if he defaults in payment. अगर B promise करे that he will discount the bill of exchange. Now this discounting of bill of exchange is consideration for the surety. Now B discounts bill of exchange to the extent of 2,000 rupees. Afterwards, at the end of 3 months, A revokes the guarantee. Now this revocation discharges A for all liability to B for any subsequent discounts. But A will be liable to B for 2,000 rupees if C defaults. Okay. Now after this, section 131 talks about revocation of continuing guarantee by surety's death. So the death of the surety operates in the absence of any contract to the contrary as the revocation of a continuing guarantee so far as regards future transaction. So surety will be discharged under section 130 by giving notice, and section 131 mein if surety dies the continuing guarantee will come to an end, and in both the cases it operates with respect to future transaction. Now second mode of discharge is by the conduct of the creditor. Section 133 says discharge of surety by variance in terms of contract. So any variance made without surety's consent in the terms of the contract between the principal debtor and the creditor discharges the surety as to transaction subsequent to the variance. So अगर surety के knowledge के बिना और उसकी consent के बिना कोई भी agreement होता है between principal debtor and the creditor, if there's any contract between them, then the surety is discharged with respect to any subsequent transactions after the variation is made. Now in the example, A guarantees C against the misconduct of B in an office to which B is appointed by C and of which the duties are defined by an act of the legislature. By a subsequent act, the nature of the office is materially altered. Afterwards, B misconducts himself. So क्योंकि subsequent act के through the nature is materially altered, A is discharged by the change from future liability under his guarantee, though the misconduct of B is in respect of a duty not affected by the later act. But अगर बिना surety को बताए आप कुछ भी variance कर रहे हो and he did not consent to it, then he will not be liable for any future transactions. So it automatically discharges the surety. Now section 134 talks about discharge of surety by release or discharge of principal debtor. The surety is discharged by any contract between the creditor and the principal debtor by which the principal debtor is released or by any act or omission of the creditor, the legal consequence of which is the discharge of principal debtor. So अगर creditor कोई भी contract करता है with principal debtor and thereby discharges the principal debtor, या फिर creditor के किसी action से the legal consequence is such that the principal debtor is automatically discharged, तो उन दोनों scenario में surety will also be discharged. Now the example says A contracts with B for a fixed price to build a house for B within a stipulated time, B supplying the necessary timber. C guarantees A's performance of the contract, but B omits to supply the timber. C is discharged from his suretyship क्योंकि यहाँ पे creditor defaults and he did not supply the timber at the first place. So this will automatically discharge the principal debtor and hence also discharge the surety. After this, section 135 talks about discharge of surety when creditor compounds with, gives time to or agrees not to sue principal debtor. So a contract between the creditor and the principal debtor by which the creditor makes a composition with or promises to give time to or not to sue the principal debtor, it will discharge the surety unless the surety assents to such contract. So this is self-explanatory कि अगर creditor कोई भी agreement करता है with principal debtor and thereby he compounds his actions or gives time to him और agree करता है in contract with principal debtor that he will not sue the principal debtor. So obviously surety वहाँ पे अटका तो नहीं रहेगा, it will also discharge the surety. Now let's look at the scenario when surety is not discharged. So under section 136, surety is not discharged when agreement made with third person to give time to principal debtor. So where a contract to give time to the principal debtor is made by the creditor with a third person and not with the principal debtor, the surety is not discharged. तो हमने इसके पहले वाले सेक्शन में under section 135 we saw कि अगर creditor makes a contract with principal debtor and gives him time, उस सिनेरियो में surety is discharged. But under 136, अगर creditor makes a contract with a third person, he comes in agreement with a third person, then in that scenario and thereby gives time to the principal debtor, तो उस केस में surety is not discharged. Let's look at the example. C, the holder of an overdue bill of exchange drawn by A as surety for B and accepted by B contracts with M. Here M is the third party to give time to B. A is not discharged. So the creditor is coming in contract with M. So therefore the surety in this case is not discharged. After this, section 137 says creditor's forbearance to sue does not discharge surety. So mere forbearance on the part of the creditor to sue the principal debtor or to enforce any other remedy against him does not, in the absence of any provision in the guarantee to the contrary, discharge the surety. Let's look at the illustration. B owes to C a debt guaranteed by A. The debt becomes payable. C does not sue B for a year after the debt has become payable. So just because creditor उसको sue नहीं कर रहा है and he is not enforcing his remedy, it will not discharge the surety. After this, under section 139, discharge of surety by creditor's act or omission impairing surety's eventual remedy. If the creditor does any act which is inconsistent with the right of the surety or omits to do any act which his duty to the surety requires him to do, and the eventual remedy of the surety himself against the principal debtor is thereby impaired, the surety is discharged. तो अगर creditor कुछ भी ऐसा करता है जिसके वजह से surety की security against the principal debtor is impaired, उस केस में again surety will be discharged. Now let's look at the third mode of discharge, that is discharge by invalidation of contract. So under section 142, guarantee obtained by misrepresentation is invalid. So any guarantee which has been obtained by means of misrepresentation made by the creditor or with his knowledge and assent concerning a material part of the transaction is invalid. After this, under section 143, guarantee obtained by concealment is invalid. So any guarantee which the creditor has obtained by means of keeping silence as to material circumstances वो भी invalid होगा, and in both these cases the surety will be discharged. Let's look at the illustration. A engages B as clerk to collect money for him. B fails to account for some of his receipts and A in consequence calls upon him to furnish security for his duly accounting. C gives his guarantee for B's duly accounting. A does not acquaint C with the B's previous misconduct. B afterward makes default. The guarantee is invalid. So इस केस में C जब guarantee दे रहा था B के regard में, तब it was responsibility of A to tell him about his previous misconduct, but B concealed that fact and इसीलिए the surety in this case is discharged from his liability. After this, section 144 says, guarantee on contract that creditor shall not act on it until co-surety joins. So where a person gives a guarantee upon a contract that the creditor shall not act upon it until another person has joined in it as co-surety, the guarantee is not valid if that other person does not join. So अगर surety creditor को बोल रहा है that I will not be responsible until a co-surety joins and you're not supposed to act until a co-surety joins, तो फिर अगर creditor उसके बाद भी act करता है then the guarantor is not liable until and unless a co-surety has joined. Okay. After this, let's talk about rights of surety. So surety has a right against principal debtor, against creditor, as well as against co-sureties. Against principal debtor, he has a right of subrogation and right of indemnity. Against creditor, he has a right of securities. And against co-surety, he has right of contribution. So we'll deal with each one of them individually. So right against the principal debtor, section 140 talks about rights of surety on payment or performance. Where a guaranteed debt has become due or default of the principal debtor to perform a guaranteed duty has taken place, the surety upon payment or performance of all that he is liable for is invested with all the right which the creditor had against the principal debtor. Now, as per this section, एक बार surety ने अपनी promise जो उसने किया था वो perform कर दिया या फिर प्रिंसिपल डेटर के डिफ़ॉल्ट पे उसने जो पेमेंट था वो पेमेंट कर दिया, तो फिर उसके बाद श्योरिटी स्टेप्स इन द शूज़ ऑफ द क्रेडिटर. ना स्टेप्स इन द शूज़ ऑफ द क्रेडिटर का मतलब श्योरिटी के पास अब सारे राइट्स हैं जो कि क्रेडिटर के पास थे अगेंस्ट द प्रिंसिपल डेटर. दिस इज व्हाट दिस सेक्शन इज सेइंग. एंड इस सेक्शन के प्रिंसिपल को राइट ऑफ सब्रोगेशन बोला जाता है. सो राइट ऑफ सब्रोगेशन सेज व्हेन द श्योरिटी हैज पेड ऑल दैट ही इज लायबल फॉर, he is invested with all the rights which the creditor had against the principal debtor. The surety steps into the shoes of the creditor. The creditor had the right to sue the principal debtor. So if we say that the liability of surety is coextensive with that of the principal debtor, his right is not less coextensive with that of the creditor after he satisfies creditor's debt. The surety may therefore sue the principal debtor in the rights of the creditor. से बोलते हैं कि श्योरिटीज़ की लाइबिलिटी जो होती है इज को एक्सटेंसिव विद दैट ऑफ द प्रिंसिपल डेटर. सेम वे में वी कैन से कि श्योरिटी की जो राइट्स होते हैं दे आर को एक्सटेंसिव विद दैट ऑफ द क्रेडिटर, विच मीन्स एक बार उसने क्रेडिटर के क्लेम को सेटिस्फाई कर दिया उसके बाद ही विल हैव ऑल द राइट्स अगेंस्ट द प्रिंसिपल डेटर इन द सेम मैनर एज द क्रेडिटर हैड अगेंस्ट द प्रिंसिपल डेटर. नाउ इन द केस ऑफ इन रेफरेंस लैम्पलर आयरन ओर कंपनी, मुझे नहीं पता मैंने इसको करेक्ट प्रोनाउंस किया या नहीं, a director of a company in liquidation guaranteed and paid the rent due from the company before the date of the liquidation. It was held that he was entitled to stand in the place of the creditor and to use all remedies, if need be, in the name of the creditor in any action to obtain indemnification from the principal debtor for the loss sustained. So A here is the guarantor and he basically paid during liquidation for all the rents due from the company and therefore he is now entitled to claim indemnity from the principal debtor for the loss sustained. So the Supreme Court has laid down that the surety will be entitled to every remedy which the creditor had against the principal debtor, to enforce every security and all means of payment, to stand in the place of the creditor, to have the securities transferred to him, though there was no stipulation for that, and to avail himself of all those securities against the debtor. Now this right of a surety stands not merely upon contract but also upon natural justice, because again as per natural justice principle you cannot be unjustly enriched, और अगर कोई unjust enrichment हुआ है then you need to restore the benefit. Based on the same principle, now principal debtor will be liable to pay back the surety everything and indemnify him for any loss. After this, section 145 talks about implied promise to indemnify surety. So in every contract of guarantee, there is an implied promise by the principal debtor to indemnify the surety, and the surety is entitled to recover from the principal debtor whatever sum he has rightfully paid under the guarantee, but no sums which he has paid wrongfully. So if you remember, we discussed in the beginning that in a contract of guarantee, there are three contracts. There are three parties and there are three contracts. And one of the contract is between principal debtor and guarantor. And उस contract को implied contract बोलते हैं. क्योंकि there is an implied duty on the part of the principal debtor कि एक बार claim satisfy हो जाए उसके बाद he needs to pay back or indemnify the surety for all the losses suffered by the surety or for all the sums that he has rightfully paid under the guarantee to the creditor. Let's look at the illustration. B is indebted to C and A is surety for the debt. C demands payment from A and on his refusal sues him for the amount. A defends the suit having reasonable ground for doing so but is compelled to pay the amount of the debt with cost. he can recover from B the amount paid by him for cost as well as the principal debt. So एक बार A ने satisfy कर दिया claim of B who is the creditor, C who is the creditor. तो एक बार A who is the surety उसने claim satisfy कर दिया C का who is the creditor in this case. तो फिर उसके बाद he can claim from B not only the principal debt but also the cost. After this, let's discuss right of surety against the creditor. So section 141 says surety's right to benefit of creditor's securities. A surety is entitled to the benefit of every security which the creditor has against the principal debtor at the time when the contract of suretyship is entered into, whether the surety knows of the existence of such security or not, and if the creditor loses or without the consent of the surety parts with such security, the surety is discharged to the extent of the value of the security. So, like we discussed earlier, surety steps in the shoes of the creditor and therefore surety के पास right है to all the securities which the creditor had. और अगर creditor किसी भी way में loses those security or parts with those security, then to that extent surety की liability discharge हो जाएगी and he will not be liable. So let's look at the illustration. C advances to B, his tenant, 2,000 rupees on the guarantee of A. C has also a further security for 2,000 rupees by a mortgage of B's furniture. Now C cancels the mortgage. So यहाँ पे mortgage was the security and C cancels this. B becomes insolvent and sues A. C sues A on his guarantee. Now in this case, A is discharged from his liability to the amount of value of furniture because that was the security, the mortgage was the security, and he cancels the mortgage without surety's consent and therefore surety in this case is discharged from his liability to the extent of the amount of the furniture. उसके बाद right against co-surety, section 146 says co-surety is liable to contribute equally. So, where two or more persons are co-surety for the same debt or duty, either jointly or severally, and whether under the same or different contract, and whether with or without the knowledge of each other, the co-sureties in the absence of any contract to the contrary are liable as between themselves to pay each an equal share of the whole debt or of that part of it which remains unpaid by the principal debtor. तो एज पर दिस सेक्शन अगर 2 या 3 co-sureties हैं then हर एक co-surety is liable to contribute equally to the whole debt. So as per example, let's say if there are A, B, C, 3 sureties, to D for sum of rupees 3,000 rupee lent to E. E makes default in payment. Now in this case, A, B and C are liable as between themselves to pay 1,000 rupee each. They will contribute equally और 3,000 rupee lent किया था, so 1,000 each will pay. Now under section 147, liability of co-sureties bound in different sum. Co-sureties who are bound in different sums are liable to pay equally as far as the limit of their respective obligation permits. Now as per this section, अगर co-sureties are bound in different sums, तो वो equally pay करेंगे to the extent of their limit, respective limit. Now let's look at the example. A, B, C as surety for D enter into 3 several bonds, each in a different penalty, namely A in the penalty of each 10,000 rupee, B in that of rupees 20,000, C in respect of 30,000. Condition for D's duly accounting to E. D makes default to the extent of rupees 30,000. तो अब इस केस में A की maximum liability 10,000 है, B 20 and C 40. So they can all pay 10,000. So they'll all pay 10,000 each. But let's say यहाँ पे default 50,000 रुपये का हुआ था. तो उस केस में A would have paid 10,000, B would have paid to his maximum limit that is 20,000 and C would have paid 20,000 अगर 50,000 होता. So they'll be responsible to the maximum limit for which they are liable. With this we have come to an end of the video. Thank you guys. If you like the video, please like, share and subscribe to Lawstorming and मिलते हैं अगले वीडियो में. Bye bye.